So welcome to the second lecture of our series. My name is Natasha Wingreen. I am the Outreach Director at New Haven Reads. At New Haven Reads, our mission is to increase the literacy skills of children by providing individually tailored one-on-one after-school tutoring, educational family support, and a community book bank, all at no cost to participants. In addition to our free book bank and our tutoring program, New Haven Reads offers readiness classes for pre-K and kindergarten students, as well as resources for teachers. In March, our tutoring program reached over 500 students weekly, with 375 active volunteers. While our programming has had to adapt in recent months, we continue to support our students and families through online tutoring and book bank distribution sites. Through this lecture series, we are excited to hear from experts likewise invested in promoting literacy and expanding educational access, and to share this experience and knowledge with the wider New Haven community. Thank you for joining us for today's lecture. So just a few housekeeping items. To see the speaker only, please adjust to the speaker view in the right upper hand corner of your screen. And to help ensure a quality experience for all, please keep yourself on mute. Following the lecture, you will have an opportunity to ask questions. Please do so by typing a private message to the host in the chat function in Zoom, and I will read your questions to the guest speaker for a response. We'll also do a discussion, which we'll talk about how to participate in that discussion a little bit later. So we are so thrilled to introduce Dr. Carlotta Penn. Carlotta Penn is a writer, educator, and a daydreamer from Columbus, Ohio. She spent several years as an English language teacher before transitioning to her current role in community and international engagement in higher education. Penn has written several articles on race, equity, and literacy, as well as 2 children's books, Dream a Rainbow and A Turtle with an Afro. She is the Director of Partnerships and Engagement at the Ohio State University College of Education and Human Ecology, the founder of Daydreamers Press, a curation hub for multicultural children's content, and we would like to welcome Carlotta.
Unmute it. Can you hear me now? Okay,
I
thought I did it the first time. I was just saying thank you for inviting me to share with your volunteers in your community. And that was a great introduction. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about these photos and get right into my presentation. So hello to everyone on the call. Thanks for being here. I like to move pretty quickly and try to keep a nice pace during virtual lectures. So here we go. This photo in the middle is me and my family. It's actually a couple years old, but I share it because I think my son is super cute in this photo, and I miss him at this lovely age of 18 months or whatever he is. He's now 2, so it's not super old, it's just a little bit old. The other 2 photos that are sort of faded in the background are there just to represent how my background inspires who I am today. And so on the one side, it's my parents and siblings and the dog that we had for a very short time. And on the other side, it's just my siblings and me. And so this is just a reminder for me of, where I come from and how it continues to impact who I am and the work that I do. I want to start with a poem that I was just talking about with a friend of mine. It's one of my favorite poems by Lucille Clifton. And I'll share it today as I think about a young girl named Grace, who's been in the news recently because she was sent to juvenile detention center during this pandemic for not doing her homework online. And the story is more complicated than that. But the lesson for me in her story is that our work in terms of educational equity is far from over. So this poem, Won't You Celebrate With Me, is by Lucille Clifton. And it goes, won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life. I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. And that last point about, every day something has tried to kill me and has failed, to me speaks to the struggle for educational equity and social equity. So the title of the presentation is A Linguistic Celebration, Multicultural Perspectives on Languages, Literacies, and Justice. And so today we're just going to explore some perspectives from people from across history and across the world to think about the various languages and literacies that students and families bring into educational spaces, whether that's schools or community organizations like New Haven Reads. And I want us to think about how we might challenge our individual and our collective canons of expertise as it relates to literacy in ways that open up fresh and more culturally responsive approaches to literacy engagement. And so the general format is that I'm going to present some sound bites that mostly are videos and ask you to reflect on what impacts you from those sound bites by using the chat feature at the end. And so I'm going to go through this series of sound bites, and I just ask that you jot down something from each person who's going to be a leader in literacy, and wait till the end to share it. So that's going to be the majority of the presentation. To give you an idea of where I'm coming from when I think about multicultural education, this is the definition that I'm working from, that the purpose of multicultural education is to reform the school and other educational institutions so that students from diverse spaces will experience educational equity. So I'd like for you to just take a moment now. I don't know, Natasha, is the chat feature enabled?
It is, yes.
Okay, so just to begin very quickly, I'd like to know how you all are thinking about educational equality or educational equity. Just what comes to your mind, or how do you envision it? And I'll just wait a couple of seconds, and hopefully some of you will type in there and I can read out some of what you're bringing to this conversation. So I'm going to stop my sharing really quickly and wait for the chat. So how are you all thinking about educational equality or educational equity? Does anybody have anything to share? If I don't see anything in a couple seconds, I'll go on to my understanding of it. Natasha, are you seeing anything in your chat?
I am. So they're all private to me. So you guys
Okay.
can actually share to everybody. But I will read a few of these. So
Okay.
it says equal opportunity, equal resources for all schools and students, poverty impacts in a negative way, not equal and not fair. Let's see, can you see and are you my experience is valuable? Curriculum adjustment to meet students where they're at. Updated textbooks for students and access to all resources without worry. Diverse teachers and staff, socio background, economic, student individual needs being addressed. And then,
okay, that's good. I'll stop you there. I got a couple that said images and narratives that are diverse. And someone said this quote speaks about the responsibility of educators to adapt rather than to mold the children. So I'm going to start back up the presentation. Thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts on that. One of my favorite quotes when I think about educational equality is this one from Carter G. Woodson, where he says, real education is meant to inspire people to live more abundantly, to learn to begin with life as they find it and make it better. And so all of those things that you all mentioned, I think are included in this quote from Carter G. Woodson. So I want to play our first sound clip. This is a poem or a speech called 3 Ways to Speak English. And I'm going to play the first minute of it and then ask you a question.
Today, a baffled lady observed the shell where my soul dwells and announced that I'm articulate, which means that When it comes to enunciation and diction, I don't even think of it because I'm articulate. So when my professor asks a question and my answer is tainted with the connotation of urbanized suggestion, there's no misdirected intention. Pay attention because I'm articulate. So when my father asks, what kind of thing is this? My articulate answer never goes amiss. I say, Father, this is the impending problem at hand, and when I'm on the block, I switch it up just because I can. So when my boy says, what's good with you, son? I say, I just fall out with them people, but I done. And sometimes in class, I might pause the intellectual sound and flow to ask, yo, why these books never be about my peoples? Yes, I have decided to treat all three of my languages as equal because I'm articulate. But who?
So Jamila is talking there about the importance in her life for all of the languages that she speaks, which are reflective of the different cultures that she is as a human being, and how folks see those languages and those cultures in various ways. And so my question for you is, how do you relate to this poem's opening? Maybe some of you can relate because you speak multiple languages and live through multiple cultures. Maybe some of you relate as an educator or as a tutor. But I'd like to hear from you in the chat. And how does it reflect or complicate your own experiences? How does it diverge from or celebrate your own experiences? And Natasha, I'll ask you again to help me with the chat, reading out some of those responses.
You got it. I did open it up to everybody, so it should work this time.
I don't think that I can see it unless I stop sharing, which I can do, but.
So the first one says, I was fascinated by her ability to code switch quickly. I can't personally relate, but I can imagine it makes a student very relieved to hear her voice.
And so I shared this with you all to start because I feel like, you know, if most of you are tutors, you might be working with children who come from similar backgrounds or who come from backgrounds that are different from yours. And as we'll hear more about this issue as we go on, but I know that we in education often grapple with, you know, how do you teach literacy? How do you teach the right way to speak or the right way to read or the proper way to think about reading and writing and respect the various cultures that students and families are bringing to bear on literacy. So I'm going to keep moving. Our next segment of the presentation, which will take up the bulk of it, is looking at these legacy literacy leaders. These are the people who I was referencing come from across time and space. And so I find them very inspirational, and their words help to guide me as I do this work. And so I want to share what inspires me with you. So here moving forward, I'm just going to ask you to take some time to take some notes, but we're not going to share until the end. So we're going to go through a series of sound bites, and bear with me as I find the right place to start and stop. But we'll go through a couple minutes per person, and then we'll share out at the end. Now, I tried to share their bios in the chat, but for some reason it would not allow me to copy and paste. So I am going to do a little bit of reading of these, their bios. This is Septima Clark. She was born in South Carolina, and she started teaching after graduating from Avery Normal School. She ended up being a part of many organizations such as the YWCA, the NAACP, but she's most known for working with adults in literacy. So she held informal literacy classes for adults. She pushed education and equal rights. And what we're going to hear from her in this small excerpt is her work, is her speaking about her work in the Highlander School. And so I'm going to have to find the place. So talking about churches. So she's going to start talking about how they recruited people to be tutors for this program and the importance of the program.
So I was sent to Atlanta. We worked through was Savannah, Georgia. And we worked with Savannah because Hosea Williams was there trying to get people to register to vote and didn't know that he had to teach them to read and write so they could answer the 30 questions that Georgia had for them to answer. When we were successful in Savannah, then Hosea found 18 counties in the southeastern part of Georgia, and we started schools in those 18 counties. That's when we brought in people to the center and trained them. In Savannah, the success was great. We got these people registered to vote. And in 3 weeks' time, we were able, with the help of the SNCC boys and Southern Christian Leadership Conference's staff, we put 9,000 Black registered voters on the books.
Can you recall whether this was at 60 or 61?
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. I know that was a little bit hard to hear, but I play that clip because I think it's important for us all to honor and remember that literacy for the Black community in particular is directly connected to justice. And so that these folks that Septima Clark and others were working with were learning to read so that they could register to vote, so that they could vote in the people and the policies that would lead to justice and freedom in their lives and equality. And so thinking about literacy is always connected to justice. The next leader is Paulo Freire. His pedagogy of literacy education involves not only reading the word, but also reading the world. This involves the development of critical consciousness. The formation of critical consciousness allows people to question the nature of their historical and social situation, to read their world with the goal of acting as subjects in the creation of a democratic society. For education, Freire implies a dialogic exchange between teachers and students where both learn, question, and both reflect and participate in meaning making.
If you ask me, Paulo.
So I'm going to skip to where he's talking about language and power here.
Thinking of using, of teaching, of knowing to the teachers in order for them. Who says that this accent or that this way of thinking is the cultivate one? If there is one which is cultivated, this is because there is another one which is not. So, do you see? It's impossible to think of that without of language without thinking of ideology and the power. I defend the duty of the teachers to teach the cultivated pattern, and I defend the right of the kids or of the adults to learn the dominant pattern. But it is necessary in being a democratic, tolerant teacher. It is necessary to explicitly, to make clear to the kids or to the adults that their way of speaking is as beautiful as our way of speaking. Second, that they have the right to speak like this. Third, nevertheless, they need to learn the so-called dominant syntax for different reasons. That is, the more the oppressed, the poor people, get the comment on the dominant syntax, the more they can articulate their voices and their speech in the struggle against injustice.
All right, so that was Paulo Freire, and remember, we're jotting down some impactful moments or ideas from these leaders' excerpts. The next person is Katerina Te Haikoko Matera, who's from New Zealand, and she was a Maori language proponent, an educator, and she was also an artist and a writer. She was a writer of children's books as well as materials for adults. She was involved in efforts to revive and revitalize the Maori language, and they started these immersion schools to sort of teach the community who had lost the language to revitalize this language. And so in this clip, we're going to hear a little bit from one of the students of the school, and then we'll hear from her at the very end. So there's a couple of excerpts in this one.
Yeah. Nara. Whakawhanaunga he kaupapa whakaiti kia o tēnei kaupapa te atana. Pērā mai te kuia nei a te hei kōko kia mātou. I te wā i ako ana mātou i tōna taha ko au ko ringi ko o keroa. Rātou ue tahi atu ko I hakama. Te whaene a pētu hae ki mai. Ki te haere koutou ki te whakaako I tētahi tangata. Me whakaiti koutou I a koutou. Kia noho ko koe I raro ko ngā kaiako, ko ngā ako ngā kirunga. E hara I te mea ko ngā kaiako kirunga, ko ngā ako ngā kiraro. Pērā te tirohanga atu a tauiwi. O tira o ngā kura a tauiwi. Ko ngā kaiako kairunga, ko ngā ako ngā kairaro. Engari ki te ātārangi, ko whakahuri tērā whakaara. Kia noho mai ko ngā ako ngā tonu kirunga, ko ngā kaiako kiraro. Pērā te.
All right, in the second clip, we'll hear from Katerina.
Hoi anō. Koe ia tērā. I te mutunga o te pukapuka e pāta I tonu ana. Kātahi e kā rongo ki te tahi reo.
And she's reading from one of her own books here.
Nei tau a kōrero. Tūmeke pai a huhu tū. I rongo tika aia? Huhu koroheke, tana karanga. Kei whē koe. Ka whakarongo anō aia. Mai whea te reo o huhu koroheke? E hara mai ngā kapua? E hara mai te papa whenua? E hara mai ngā puti, te reo o huhu koroheke? E ahu ke ana mai roto tonu ia huhu tū.
Nei rā te mihi nui a wakahuia kia koe te.
All right, so that was Katerina. So if you have any thoughts about the Maori language or Katerina in this work, jot that down so we can talk about it later. And then we'll move on to our last person who, Eddie Benton Benai. This clip, he's talking to a group of people about his experiences as an Indigenous person in mainstream American schools. And similar to Katerina, his work, a lot of the work that he did was around language revitalization and sustaining languages and fighting for the educational rights of people in his community.
So
I'll play a little bit of his intro. He's introducing himself.
we went to dash giga window moon. Asia which Muanga the dash kinamani o and a shinabe kenda sweet. Manu wene Ushkan shinabe window kendang on the when Japan. Ani na ma when Japan siang. And Gajan Ashimirash. I sort of, in this language, introduced myself again. And Eddie Benton is the name that appears on my, on most of my documents, driver's license and degree and the like. We added B'nai to that when my children started to get born, because my full name in our language is Badwedan B'nai Si. Badwedan B'nai Si, that means the sound of thunderbird approaching when you...
Okay, I'm gonna skip ahead a bit. I just wanted you to hear that introduction. So here is when he starts talking about reading.
As I progressed in school through grade 6, 7, 8, I started to read. I learned to read real well. So I began to read from different cultures. Well, of course, we had to read from the books. We had to read about white man's history. You know, and the book seemed to say that white people were the only valid people in the world. And white people were the only people that knew anything. And I had a problem with that, because I knew different. I knew what my grandmothers and grandfathers said. I knew how my mother and my father lived. We weren't all drunks. I never saw a drunk person in my early years. And my father went to work every day. My mother worked hard every day. And we had horses, we had boats, we had canoes, we made rice, we made maple syrup, we planted gardens. So as a child, I was involved in all of that. I learned how to plant. I watched my mother and Anishinaabe Kois do the planting ceremony. I listened to my father and my uncle as they sang the planting songs. And I learned what planting and the beauty and the spirituality of food. And of course, in time, I graduated from grade school. When I got into junior high school, I started to get in trouble more. I didn't do really bad things in class, but I had a habit of raising my hand. I'd raise every time something didn't sound right.
Okay, so I'll stop it there. And our last clip is moving on from our leaders. It's a video from NPR's StoryCorps that I love. I used to show it all the time when I was teaching, just to drive home the point about diverse cultures and diverse languages, and our need to be respectful of the different cultures and languages and literacies of the people who we work with and live with.
Jibuyan.
My name, when I started kindergarten, was Ramon. And by the time I was in the second grade, everybody was calling me Raymond. You know, out in the playground, in the classroom, Raymond, hey, Raymond, hey, Raymond. And trying to adjust to this, you know what I mean? And if there was a girl named Maria, her name became Mary. And Juanita became Jane. So one day we got a new student by the name of Facundo Gonzalez. Facundo Gonzalez, man. When he came into school, we noticed they called an emergency administrative meeting. You kind of hear him talking to the door. What are we going to do with this guy, man? You know what I mean? How are we going to change his name, you know? And one teacher goes, well, you know what? Why don't we try to shorten the name a little bit? And they go, yeah, well, but how do you spell it? Facundo. They go, well, why don't we just spell it FAC? And one of the teachers, well, that means his name would be Fac. And the other teachers looked at it, no, that sounds too much like a dirty word. You can't be saying Fac. Where's your homework, you know? Where's Fac at, you know what I mean? So that was a trip we always remembered going to elementary school because Facundo was the only guy who never got his name changed.
All right, so you've listened through a few of these literacy leaders. And so our final question, which I'd like for us to use some of your notes that you've been taking. What are the implications of what you've heard from today in terms of your role as a literacy coach or tutor or leader or a caregiver in your school or your community? So what are the implications for you and your role in this work based on whatever has impacted you or whatever ideas stood out for you? I'd like us to use the chat feature or raise your hand, and Natasha can call on some people. It would be nice to just hear people speak out now since we've done a lot of typing in the chat. But if you don't want to speak out and you just want to share in the chat, that's fine too. So Natasha, if you see anyone raising their hands, I'd love to hear from the group.
Do you mind stopping to share your screen so I can see everybody's face?
Sure.
Thank you. All right, so we have Carol. So you can unmute yourself now, Carol. Down.
There we go.
Mm-hmm.
I spent my whole life in education. I started out as a teacher. I ended up as a college administrator in counseling and helping students. But when I came to New Haven Reads, I learned a whole new piece of education. And I liked the idea in one of the videos about putting the student above yourself. Your role, my role as a tutor, is to help this child move on the continuum. And how he or she does that, so far I've only had boys. Somebody must know that I only had 2 sons, but you have to make a connection with them, and that's not always easy. Sometimes it's, I've really never had anybody who resented being there, but it takes a while. They don't just jump into it and get excited about what they're seeing on the computer or moving up a level. I haven't found. So I have to spend some time getting to know them, and in some ways letting them draw the boundaries of where we're going, you know. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I mean, they have this strange old woman who's plopped down in a chair for an hour, who's going to help them read better. Fortunately, in New Haven Reads, they actually learn to love reading. I've never seen that before, and I get to be part of that, but I have to let them take the lead to a large degree. I have to follow their lead and their levels of enthusiasm about what pieces of it are more interesting, or where they are that day, or whether they got any sleep last night, or whether their personal circumstances are such, whatever. Have them take me where they feel they're ready to go.
I think that's a great line there, that they take you where they feel they're ready to go. I started working as a tutor when I was a teenager, but more recently I worked as a reading recovery teacher a few years ago, and that was sort of one of the lines that they pulled from Mari Clay, who started reading recovery, is going, taking the direction that the child is going, or following the direction of the child, and that's a concept that you see across different philosophies, that that we're following the child or centering the child. I'm just going to share a little bit from the chat, and then Natasha, maybe we can find one more person to share before we do Q&A. In the chat, I see some folks talking about how our curriculums are Eurocentric. Someone said the way we speak is held at a Eurocentric standard, and as a second-generation immigrant, being articulate does not follow Eurocentric standards. Someone else says how we approach language is very Eurocentric. And then someone says it's been a reminder to be sensitive to other cultures. US citizens tend to think our culture is the best, but other cultures are the best to people of other cultures. Neither is better or worse. And Natasha, is there anybody else that wants to speak out that we can hear from before we go on to the next part of your day?
I think it's Joe.
I don't know, can you hear me now?
We can.
I'm a first-generation immigrant and had my name changed. My real name is José Jesus Cafardos, but everyone knows me as Joe. And I think it's so important what I heard people say about using the dominant syntax to obtain justice, what Mr. Paulo Freire said. And it's something that I try to bring to the kids is that, okay, we need to maintain who we are and our identity through our language, but we also need to understand where we live, and that if we cannot be articulate, as someone else said, then others may not listen to us. So it's important through our tutoring, through our teaching, whatever it is that we do, that we remember these lessons these people have shared with us. And I thank you for that, Dr. Penn.
Thank you. And I think that the other side of that, what I heard is while we teach the dominant syntax, to also be doing the work of justice such that the dominant syntax does not continue to be the only right way to speak, or the only acknowledged way to speak. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you to all who participated in the chat and who spoke out. I'm just going to share my screen again to share with you my contact information before we go into the Q&A. I'm at Daydreamers Press for my website, for Instagram, for Facebook, for Gmail. It's all Daydreamers Press. So please, if you are on any of those platforms, join me as I continue in the work of amplifying voices of my own culture and other cultures through Daydreamers Press. And I'll turn it back over to you, Natasha. Thank you.
So thank you so much for participating in that discussion, and thank you, Carlotta, for facilitating. We do have some questions, but if you have any specific questions, go ahead and send them through the chat, and I will try to get through a few here with the time left that we have. First question I have is there a need to look at the culture in reference to education? Is it in the interest of the child?
The question says, is there a need to look at the culture?
In reference to education. So looking at their culture in reference to education. So when you're speaking of academic.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I acknowledge that, we each are bringing who we are. If, say if you're a teacher or tutor, to whatever educational space you're in. But as the person who's in a position of authority, it really is your responsibility to learn from that person what you can about their needs. And that's sort of what Carol was saying, that you may not know who you're going to encounter, and you can't necessarily know the ins and outs of all the diverse cultures that surround us, but you should certainly be working to better understand it. And I guess I can say that in my work, so I started off as an English language educator for adults, and I would have people from all around the world in my classes. They were people who were mostly recently arrived immigrants and who were taking English classes not for credit. So they were typically taking them just to learn English to function in their daily lives, or as a precursor to taking college classes. And so the one thing that I had going for me was that I knew I was ignorant. I knew I didn't know all that I needed to know about the different people and their experiences coming into my class. But I was committed to doing what I could to make that space one that was as right as could be for everybody. And so, the culture is always important.
So next question is, do you feel that there's a way that through our students we can change the dominant education policy for the future? Is there a good way of doing that?
Gosh, I don't know if that's a question I can answer best, but I certainly think that needs to be the focus of education. And that goes back to some of the quotes that I shared before, that the purpose of education anymore must be that we leave the world better than what we've got. And what we've got right now is one that needs a lot of work. And so I feel like everything that needs to be learned in the classroom can be done through the lens of justice. Every topic or field that there is in school can be understood through the lens of how can we make the world better in science, in medicine, in literature, in books. All of those topics can be taught and learned and engaged through the lens of justice and equity.
Okay, and the final one, thank you. The final one is, right now with distance learning, we are experiencing a closer intimacy and proximity with our students' home cultures and languages. Mm-hmm. Do you think this moment presents unique opportunities with respect to multicultural and inclusive education? And how can we take advantage of this unique moment?
Yeah, I think both things and more are likely happening. There are students and families whose culture is causing, because of the system and the teachers, a disadvantage or a greater disadvantage. And there are communities where teachers, as the question states, are recognizing that they are getting a more personal look and able to hopefully adapt their teaching methods accordingly. So I think that, what was the second half of the question, Natasha?
How can we take advantage of this unique moment?
Oh, yeah. I think that, the ideal would be to take the best of what virtual learning has and keep it as part of our teaching repertoire, our teaching and learning repertoires, once we're able to go back to schools in a more full capacity. A lot of what is happening with the virtual education, or even the change in the number of students that can be in a room, are things that really should be happening anyway. The best elementary schools or K through 12 schools have lower ratios. So there, my mom was a kindergarten teacher, and she would have 31 students in her class, whereas the private school down the street might have 8 or 10 students in the class. So they were socially distanced, right? But it was in the name of, we know that 5-year-olds will learn a lot better if there are only 8 students in a class as opposed to 30. Being able to speak with parents by text and by FaceTime and by different virtual platforms, and hopefully do more home visits, all of those things should continue into the new normal that we're creating.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you guys for your questions. We did have one last question, but I will just send it your way through an email, and then you can respond.
Okay.
We're out of time. So we would like to say thank you to Carlotta for your time and for sharing your lecture with us and your experience. Thank you for participating today in our, second of 7 lectures this summer. We are super excited to continue. We'll be putting this lecture up on our website. We'll send everybody a video copy to all registered guests. Please join us for our next one, which will be next Saturday, August 1st at the same time with Dr. David Brazy, and he'll be discussing parts of language and foundations of reading. So again, huge thank you to Carlotta. Thank you so much for participating today, everybody, and enjoy your Saturday.
All right, bye everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.